When missiles fail to silence a leader, what's the next weapon? History never stops at a single explosion. When violence failed to silence a leader, another form of pressure was chosen. Just days after the strike in Yatenga, an attack that fueled anger and unity across Africa, many believed Washington would pull back. They were mistaken. When force could not silence a leader, another kind of pressure was used. Violence was not the end of the story. If bombs could not break Burkina Faso, then came the bomb of debt. It began with a whisper, a single line buried inside a classified telegram. 70% of Burkina Faso's gold within 48 hours, or pay $5.6 billion in debt and interest. At the bottom was a name that needed no introduction: Donald Trump. Then the most powerful man in the West. This wasn't a fair discussion. It wasn't diplomacy. It was pressure wrapped in money and masked with threats. The G7 and the IMF believed they could reshape the future of a small African nation with a signature, a sanction, and the full weight of the global financial system. But history has a way of surprising empires. That ultimatum fell into the hands of a remarkable man, Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, who not long ago left the United Nations in stunned silence. He refused to hand over his country's future. What happens when one African leader dares to say no to the empire? What happens when a continent long dismissed as dependent discovers the courage to stand tall? Do you believe this fight is part of God's greater plan? Tell us what you see unfolding. Stay with us, because this is not the story of one person or of one nation. It is the story of an entire continent reclaiming its voice. Subscribe and raise your voice for an Africa that stands tall and rise. Drop your city. Share it loud. Let them know we will not be quiet. May God bless Traoré, protect Africa, and bring true peace to the world. If you believe this, say, "God bless Africa," in the comments. On August 12, 2025, reports began to spread about a classified message connected to Burkina Faso. The cable, according to these reports, was handed directly to Captain Ibrahim Traoré at 6:30 in the morning. People who claim to have seen it described the language as firm and unmistakable. The message demanded something shocking. Burkina Faso had 48 hours to hand over 70% of its newly mined gold or pay back $5.6 billion in debt and interest. At the bottom of the document was a name that needed no introduction: Donald J. Trump. At the time, he was both President of the United States and a leading voice inside the G7 and the International Monetary Fund. His supposed demand came with global power behind it. Right away, major news networks pushed back. Some said the story was made up or blown out of proportion, arguing that this wasn't how the U.S. government handles international debt. Others said these kinds of negotiations are never this aggressive. Still, a question remained. What if the cable was real? What if the public only hears what big governments want them to hear? And what happens when secret information gets out? If true, the message was more than a warning, it was a threat. Sources say it listed possible punishments, including sanctions, trade blockades, and steps to damage the country's economy. In Washington, that kind of language might seem like business as usual, but to people in Africa, it felt like a direct attack. For generations, the West has said its presence in Africa is about helping with aid, loans, and protection. But this cable didn't ask for a meeting or a negotiation. It demanded gold, the backbone of Burkina Faso's economy. They control the headlines, but we ask the questions. What if the truth was never meant to reach us? And when it finally breaks free, they will do everything to silence it. Truth isn't always banned because it's false. Sometimes it's banned because it's real. The story spread fast. From Nigeria to the Congo, headlines read, "West demands Africa's gold, Burkina Faso, given 48 hours." In towns, over radios, and around kitchen tables, people asked the same thing: would Traoré give in? Reports from inside the capital say he didn't. Instead, Traoré read the cable again, put it down, and said quietly, "So this is how they collect a debt poison in a suit and tie." This was not a fair deal. It was a crooked game of dice, rigged from the start, the House always winning the kind of hustle even Capone would nod at. He didn't call foreign embassies or ask for more time. He met with generals, local leaders, and mining officials. His reply was clear. Tell the G7 and the IMF Burkina Faso is not for sale. No one can confirm every detail of this story, but what followed was real. Across Africa, young people, students, and ordinary citizens began repeating Traoré's words. In Western capitals, governments took notice. What if other nations followed his lead? What if Mali, Niger, or Chad said no next? To many, this wasn't just about gold. It was about a continent ready to defend its future and reject outside control. That night in Washington, Paris, and London, analysts began asking tough questions. And even if the cable is never fully proven, it started a conversation the world can't ignore. How much power do global leaders truly hold? And how far will smaller nations go to protect their independence? Do you believe they're hiding something? Drop your thoughts below. If even part of this is true, what does it mean for all of us? Long before any ultimatum reached his desk, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had already been preparing. For years, the world described Burkina Faso as poor dependent and forever tied to foreign aid. But beneath the Sahel's dry plains lay something far more significant, a resource base that could rewrite the country's future. In the months after taking power, Traoré launched a discreet geological survey. Teams of scientists, engineers, and security personnel worked quietly far from public view. Their goal was simple: determine the true scale of the nation's mineral wealth. Sources later claimed that encrypted systems and strict secrecy surrounded the operation. The findings were striking. Northern Burkina Faso contained one of the largest untapped gold reserves on the continent. Traoré understood what this meant. If the discovery became widely known, it could draw in foreign powers with contracts, loans, and political pressure. To avoid that outcome, the information was contained until mining equipment began moving and new production started. Western intelligence services soon noticed. Satellite readings showed unusual activity in remote areas. Equipment linked to foreign suppliers raised new questions. By the time reports reached Washington, Paris, and London, it was clear that Burkina Faso was changing the rules. The government had moved to reclaim its gold mines from foreign companies, many of which had long shaped extraction under favorable terms for the West. The shift was unprecedented. Revenues that once left the country were now directed into a new national development fund. State media highlighted investments in education, roads, and agriculture financed by domestic resources rather than foreign loans. In villages, the message spread quickly. Our gold is finally ours. For Western policymakers, the concern went far beyond Burkina Faso itself. Analysts warned of a ripple effect. If one country could successfully reclaim control of its resources and redirect profits inward, others might follow. Niger, Mali, or even Congo could see it as a model. What was at stake was not only access to gold, but the financial and political structures that had long shaped Africa's role in the global economy. Commentary in Europe reflected this alarm. Some analysts warned of risks to the CFA franc system, while others described the move as a direct challenge to the IMF's influence. One London-based newspaper put it plainly, "Burkina Faso rewrites the rules." In Ouagadougou, however, the tone was very different. Traoré's government portrayed the shift as an act of sovereignty, not defiance. Soldiers replaced private contractors at mine sites, and shipments once headed for foreign refineries were redirected to domestic processing facilities. For the first time in decades, the country's gold trade was fully under national control. To Western institutions, this represented a break from established practice. To citizens of Burkina Faso, it symbolized independence. What Traoré presented was not only resistance to external pressure, but also a new framework for resource management. As the world reacted to reports of American demands and IMF pressure, the broader picture became clear. The debate was no longer just about debt. It was about whether an African nation could control its own resources, chart its own path, and withstand the weight of global institutions that had long set the terms. In that sense, the challenge ahead was not only financial, it was political, even existential. The question was whether this moment would remain an isolated act or become a turning point in Africa's future. Now, with the world watching and the clock ticking on Trump's demand, one truth became undeniable. The battle ahead was no longer just about debt, but the existence and freedom of Africa. Some say Traoré's too young. Others say he's reckless. But what if God sent him for a reason? They mocked Moses too until the sea split. Let the haters talk. God is moving. Not everyone understands God's timing. But I believe Traoré is part of his plan. The Bible says the last shall be first. Maybe Africa's time is coming. And when Africa needed courage, did God send Traoré? What do you say? If you believe that comment, thank God for Traoré. And let's take a moment to pray for peace across the world. The 48-hour clock was ticking. Every hour the pressure mounted. Washington expected panic. Paris expected negotiation. And the IMF expected surrender. But inside Ouagadougou's war room, Captain Ibrahim Traoré was charting a very different path. He did not flinch. He did not beg for more time. Instead, he called together his most trusted circle, senior commanders, political leaders, economic advisors, and directors of the State Mining Authority. When the meeting began, he held the cable in his hand, then placed it on the table for all to see. This, he said evenly, is not a letter. It is a threat. They want 70% of our future. In return, they promise nothing but fear. Tell them Burkina Faso is not for sale. Those words were carried swiftly across ministries and garrisons. By nightfall, they had reached the streets. Students repeated them in university halls. Miners whispered them while sharpening their tools. Mothers taught their children the phrase as a lullaby of resistance. A nation had found its rallying cry. Traoré then moved decisively. He ordered every gold convoy under double guard. He locked down oil fields and instructed state broadcasters to prepare a live message. Hours later, television screens across the country went dark before flickering to life with a simple image: a young soldier in uniform, one hand on the national flag, the other holding the cable marked Debt Recovery Strategy. His voice was calm, deliberate, unshaken. To the people of Burkina Faso and to our brothers and sisters across Africa, they are not demanding debt repayments. They are demanding our submission. They want not just our gold, but our fear. Let them hear me clearly. We are not Libya. We are not Iraq. We are not your playground. We will never surrender our land to repay debts you imposed. We will never bow to your weapons or your banks. You gave us 2 days. Here is our answer. Now you have 2 days to take your greed, your threats, and your arrogance, and leave African soil. He saluted, stepped away from the camera. The screen went dark. This was not a speech. It was a turning point. The impact was immediate. Across Burkina Faso, cheers erupted. Women banged pots in the streets. Young men lit fireworks in dusty alleys. In Bamako, Dakar, and Nairobi, activists replayed his words again and again. But while Africa celebrated Western capitals panicked. At ExxonMobil headquarters, emergency calls went out to Washington. At Halliburton, executives scrambled to measure the financial loss. At CIA stations across the Sahel, new missions were launched. The narrative had to change, and quickly. Soon, Western media outlets rolled out the script: Traoré is unstable. Burkina Faso faces disaster. Debt refusal will bring chaos. CNN and Fox News painted him as reckless, even dangerous. Editorials compared him to Gaddafi, warning of another crisis in the making. Yet the propaganda backfired. Inside, Burkina Faso students mocked the coverage. They clipped headlines and turned them into protest songs. DJs in Ouagadougou mixed CNN sound bites into hip-hop tracks blasting from nightclubs. Across social media, young Africans posted the same caption under Western news clips. If they hate him this much, he must be doing something right. The resistance was no longer only military. It was cultural, generational, and deeply rooted. Women's cooperatives delivered food to soldiers guarding the mines. Elders invoked ancestral blessings for protection. University groups organized lectures on sovereignty and resource justice. And through it all, Traoré remained unshaken. He knew the West's real fear was not his defiance, but his example. If Burkina Faso could stand, others might follow. The question was no longer whether he would surrender. The question was whether Africa itself had found a new voice. Burkina Faso is not for sale. Africa is not a colony. If your heart says, finally, then comment, it's time for Africa. 2 days after the ultimatum, Ouagadougou became the stage for an unprecedented gathering. At the presidential palace, 3 military planes landed in quick succession. From Mali came Colonel Assimi Goïta, calm and deliberate. From Niger arrived General Abdourahmane Chiani, his gaze sharp with defiance. From Guinea marched Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, tall and unapologetic. Together they walked into the palace. Hours later, the 4 men emerged side by side, standing shoulder to shoulder with Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Cameras captured the moment, and their words resounded across Africa. If you touch Burkina Faso, you touch all of us. It was more than solidarity. It was a doctrine. The birth of the Alliance of Sahel States, quickly dubbed the AES Shield, Africa's answer to NATO. For decades, Africa had been divided by colonial borders manipulated by foreign capitals. Now, before the eyes of millions, a new front of unity was declared. AES was not ink on paper. It was forged by blood betrayal and a shared dream of liberation. Mali pledged military advisors to guard Burkina Faso's gold mines. Niger committed logistics expertise hardened by years of desert warfare. Guinea offered airspace for emergency supply routes. Together they vowed to defend not only land but dignity. Years ago, when he was still a young officer, Ibrahim Traoré was sent on assignment to the western part of the country near the old manganese mines in a region that once served as a stronghold for anti-colonial fighters. During his visit, he stopped by a small community of elders survivors of 3 different eras occupation coups and the backroom deals that were always sold as stability. The oldest among them was a thin man, skin weathered like old bark eyes, squinting as if searching through memory. He looked Traoré up and down, then spoke in a low, rough voice, steady but tinged with bitterness. There are men who wear the uniform to be soldiers, and there are men who wear it to remind a nation that it once stood tall. Not much more was said. It didn't need to be. The elders looked at him the way you weigh a heavy load, wondering if this young man could carry the weight of a broken history. On his way out of the village, Traoré stopped at a roadside tea stall. A middle-aged woman was boiling water, sleeves rolled high, eyes red from smoke, fanning the fire as sweat ran down her face. He ordered a glass of tea and sat beside a man fixing an old radio. No one asked who he was or where he came from. It was just 3 people sitting under a hot tin roof, listening to the crackle of the fire and the buzz of flies. After a long silence, the man spoke more to himself than anyone else. My father worked the gold pits under the French. 10 years underground. Never saw paper money, just ration slips and a warning, do your job or lose it. His back was bent before I could walk. By the time he was old, he couldn't speak. Even drinking water made him cough. And my boy... He stopped there. His voice caught. He turned his face away. Traoré stayed quiet. He just watched as a skinny child nearby scratched letters into the dirt with his finger. A breeze pushed through the tin roof. And in that moment, Traoré understood some wounds aren't written in history books. They don't have national holidays. But they still bleed quietly through the lives of the living. Western capitals watched in disbelief. In Washington, analysts feared the rise of a new regional bloc immune to traditional pressure. In Paris, whispers spread that France's centuries-old grip on West Africa was slipping. Intelligence agencies warned of a pan-African firewall forming beyond their control. Today, more and more people see the IMF not as a partner, but as a financial weapon, a tool of modern colonialism. It's no longer viewed as an institution that helps struggling nations. Instead, it's seen as a mechanism of control. To many of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's supporters, the IMF's loans and conditions are nothing more than modern chains debt used to keep African countries under the thumb of Western interests. In this context, Donald Trump is not seen as a leader. He's viewed as an international enforcer, someone who uses power and political pressure to demand resources from poorer nations. In the eyes of his critics, especially across Africa, Trump isn't a president. He's a bully, a man using threats to extract gold, not a statesman working toward peace. The anger is real. Across social media and in everyday conversations, people are questioning why Africa should be expected to pay back debts. It never asked for debts created under pressure or rooted in the exploitation of colonial rule. Voices are rising and they're not holding back. Give back what you stole. We're not paying a cent. They don't deserve it. To many, this is not about refusing to pay. It's about demanding justice. In their view, justice doesn't mean settling old accounts. It means reclaiming what was taken. And so the counterattack began. CIA operatives increased their presence in the Sahel. Private military contractors appeared along Burkina Faso's borders. Western media launched a coordinated smear campaign. Headlines screamed AES is reckless. Traoré leading Africa into disaster. Militarism threatens stability. But on the streets of Bamako, Conakry, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, the people laughed. Students remixed CNN clips into rap anthems. Graffiti artists painted murals of Traoré holding a torch above Africa, his AES brothers flanking him like guardians. Youth groups organized protests outside U.S. embassies holding signs that read, "Africa is not your minefield. Touch one, touch all?" Social media amplified the message. Hashtags like AES Shield and Our Africa for Africans trended across the continent. Videos of AES soldiers training side by side went viral. Even diaspora communities in Paris, London, and New York organized solidarity marches, chanting the same words, "Our resources, our future, our fight." This was not the Africa the West was used to confronting. For the first time in decades, a united front of nations had drawn a red line. Africa would no longer bow to threats dressed as diplomacy. Yet the danger was real. Western disinformation campaigns painted Traoré as unstable, AES as a rogue coalition. International banks quietly froze assets linked to Burkina Faso. Defense analysts speculated about covert plans to destabilize the region. Still, the alliance stood firm. Traoré reminded his people in a national address, "The West is not afraid of our weapons. They are afraid of our unity." And unity was precisely what AES represented. More than a pact of generals, it was a manifesto carried in chants, in murals, in street protests, and in the hearts of millions. From the dusty alleys of Ouagadougou to the crowded streets of Lagos, one truth echoed louder each day. The struggle of Burkina Faso was no longer a solitary fight. It was the battle of a continent reclaiming its voice. The AES Shield was not merely an alliance of convenience. It was the seed of a new doctrine, a Pan-African promise that the age of foreign domination was coming to an end. While the G7 tightened its threats and Western media sharpened their criticisms, two unexpected players stepped quietly onto the stage. They did not arrive with ultimatums or sanctions. They came with offers. According to reports, within 12 hours of the ultimatum becoming public, a discreet Chinese delegation landed in Ouagadougou. No media coverage, no ceremony, only engineers, diplomats, and a set of blueprints. Their proposal, sources said, was direct build a fully operational gold mining facility within 90 days, complete with refining capacity and valuation systems that bypassed Western banks entirely. Even more disruptive was the inclusion of a digital trade platform anchored to the digital yuan, cutting out both the CFA franc and the US dollar. For the first time, Burkina Faso could extract refined value and sell its gold without touching Western financial chains. The following day, reports claimed a Russian cargo jet landed on a secure runway outside the capital. Its load was unmistakable electronic warfare systems, radar jamming technology, and defense equipment designed to block drone surveillance. In simple terms, Russia had provided anti-drone protection shielding Burkina Faso's mining operations from outside monitoring. Reactions split sharply. In Washington, CNN called it a dangerous new alliance. The State Department accused Traoré of selling Africa to dictatorships. Paris warned of a new Cold War. But in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Conakry, the reaction was different. Crowds cheered. For many Africans, these were not foreign occupiers, but tools that could finally balance the scales. Media networks across Africa amplified the images. Videos spread, showing Chinese engineers breaking ground, Russian technicians setting up defense systems, and African soldiers saluting alongside them. Captions read, "Our resources, our rules. Our gold, our fight." The West scrambled to adjust. Analysts in Washington described it as imperialism by invitation. Financial markets wavered as investors realized Africa was no longer simply an extraction zone. Western diplomats talked of sanctions, but most hesitated. There was fear that more pressure would only accelerate Africa's pivot eastward. On the ground in Burkina Faso, changes were visible. Gold convoys, once controlled by French companies, now moved under military escort to state facilities. Payments once routed through European banks now flowed through new digital platforms. Villagers who had never seen benefits from nearby mines began to witness schools, repaired roads, paved, and farming subsidies delivered. At the center of it all was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, 35 years old, once dismissed by foreign observers as inexperienced and reckless. Now he stood as both a symbol of resistance and of possibility. He had rejected America's ultimatum, defied the IMF, rallied neighbors, and welcomed China and Russia into a partnership that shook the global order. Western headlines portrayed him as reckless authoritarian, even a pawn of foreign powers. Yet across Africa and among communities abroad, another view gained strength, a young leader who had told the empire no and had not been silenced. For those following Burkina Faso's latest developments, this was the moment the story could no longer be ignored. A small nation in West Africa had redrawn the lines of power. The question now was not whether Traoré could endure, but whether the world was ready for an Africa that refused to kneel. Do you believe this is Africa's turning point? If you believe Africa is done waiting, comment "It's time for Africa." The story of Burkina Faso in August 2025 was never just about debt or gold. Donald Trump's ultimatum was designed to break a nation. But God turned the tide for Burkina Faso. From the strike after the unjust air raid, to the leaked classified cable, to the national broadcast from the hidden gold mines, to the birth of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, the message became clear: Africa will no longer be treated as a playground for foreign powers. For those following the Captain Ibrahim latest news, the headlines no longer read like obituaries of another African leader brought down by foreign powers. Instead, they carried something: new hope. Across villages and cities, across universities and marketplaces, ordinary people saw in Traoré not just a soldier, but a mirror of their own struggle for freedom. The Burkina Faso latest news was not about poverty crisis or dependency. It was about resistance, sovereignty, and a new path. The sight of Traoré in traditional attire declaring, "We protect what is ours," became more than a statement. It became a vow repeated in countless tongues across the continent. Of course, the battle is not over. Sanctions may come. Smear campaigns will multiply. Foreign powers will not give up their hunger for Africa's resources. But something irreversible has already happened. The illusion of inevitability has shattered. If Burkina Faso could say no, then so could Mali. So could Niger. So could Congo. This is why the Captain Ibrahim latest news matters far beyond Ouagadougou. It is not just the chronicle of one man. It is the echo of an entire people reclaiming their right to decide, to defend, to dream. If your heart says yes, type it loud in the comments: Africa Rise. And remember, if this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe. Say it loud in the comments: Africa Rise. God bless Africa and Burkina Faso. Don't let silence erase our voice. Tonight we are all Burkinabe. Every comment is a reminder that we're still here, that justice still stands, and it cannot be erased. Because Africa is not just catching up, we are building our own systems from the smallest acts on our own terms. Thank you for standing with us here. We'll see you in the next chapter. A chapter they wanted hidden, but we will never let that happen.